everyone. Welcome to today's weekly web chat. I'm Darcy Bakkegard, and I'm joined today by Aimee Rogers to have a conversation about best books to keep you inspired and energized as an educator. Will you introduce yourself, Aimee? I know you've been here before, but just remind us who you are.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me back. I'm Aimee Rogers. I'm an assistant professor at the University of North Dakota in the Department of Teaching, Leadership, and Professional Practice. I teach a lot of literacy courses, so children's literature, reading in the content areas, adolescent literacy development.
But because you are placed, we'll talk about all kinds of books. Yes. Can you share for me, like I had two main questions as I was thinking about this, like why are reading books about educational practices important? And also I was thinking about during the school year, I was like, how do I ever make time to read anything? So you can jump on either of those questions first, but to me, I think those are two of like the bigger things. Like, why should we seek out these books to read? Like, what does that give us? And how do we as teachers make any time? Like, I didn't have time to go to the bathroom during the school year. Well, not during the whole year. Sorry, during the day. I just said during the whole year. So just any thoughts on those things?
You may want to go to the doctor and get that checked out if that was.
Yeah, I probably should. If it was the whole year.
Okay, so why should we be reading books? I guess I have several thoughts on that. One, as educators, I would hope that most of us, and I think most of us do, I never know where to look on this. Most of us see ourselves as lifelong learners. So I think that's one of the big reasons. I think books too allow us to pursue things that we're interested in. So it's kind of a way of personalizing our own PD, if you will, because it's more meaningful, because it's something we're interested in. Yeah, we're okay. What else was I gonna say? Yeah, I think those are my 2 points with that. You were nodding your head.
I really like that idea. Like this, you're right. It's personalized PD. It is the ultimate personalized PD. You pick it up when you have time. You pick books and you can seek out books, and we'll share a resource list here in a moment that hopefully, you're right, you can dabble your toes in different topics. And if there's something that's really on your mind or that you really want to work on right now, you can find a book that helps you do that. And for me, I do like, because I listen to podcasts and I do like reading articles. For me, I do like the deeper dive that a book gives me in really exploring multiple facets of a thing. And I mean, we're two English teachers basically having a conversation. So we're going to try not to just talk Englishy. Right. But I am just naturally, books are part of my experience. So for you, do you have any strategies, particularly during the school year? I know for me, sometimes it's just, I just catch up on reading in the summer. That is one of my main things.
Right.
But I have found for myself that if I am only focused on my classroom during the school year, I can get a little bit more lethargic, and it can start to feel a bit draining. And like my energy level, I can feel my energy level like really tapering off as I go through the school year. And I find that if I need a few punches and a few pick-me-ups. Do you have any strategy? Like, how do you build in that structure of, I mean, because books take time. They just take so much more time.
They do. So that's something I deal with too, like with my undergrads. And I work with practicing teachers, but they're like, I just don't have time. And for me, I think my argument to them is it doesn't really matter how long it takes you to read a book, as long as you're reading it. So if you're reading, 10 minutes a night before you go to bed, that's
Right.
okay.
So if it takes you the whole school year to work your way through one book,
Right.
not a problem. Like that's still little shots of ideas and shots of energy.
Right. Audiobooks too. A lot of people think that is cheating. That is not cheating. That's still reading. And this is more particularly true for my undergrads. But they'll say like, well, I don't have any time. And I'll be like, well, what did you watch on Netflix last night? Like, and
Hey, so you call us out of like how
I said undergrads, but we make time for what we value and what we think is important. So, I mean, take that for what it's worth. So
you're right. And I do think that we as educators, just as humans, we need brain breaks.
Oh, sure.
We
Yeah.
need some downtime.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need the Netflix from time to time, or we need that going to a concert. We do need that as well, just because that re-energizes us in a different way and also just feeds that spirit in a different, and just in a different way. But that doesn't
cry every Tuesday night when I'm watching This Is Us. That's helpful.
Yeah, you need that. You need that This Is Us break and connection. For me, I've been watching Lemony Snicket on Netflix. So again, just surrounding myself with books, but in movie form instead of in just that. But that's a great point. Audiobooks, I have found that I can listen to educational books because depending on the style of the book, and this is not a criticism of educational books, for me, it's just an observation. A lot of them aren't super data heavy. Some of them are, but a lot of books that I have turned to for sparks of inspiration are not particularly data heavy. So they're things that I can listen to while I'm making supper, or getting ready in the morning, or driving for 20 minutes, because I don't need to put all of my attention on it. So, and I have a pile of books here. So if I'm reading something like visual learning for teachers, this is John Hattie's Connection. And I also read John Hattie's book where he's breaking down all of the educational research on what has a positive or like a proven impact on student learning. That was a read for 10 minutes and mull over, because it was dense and it was very data heavy. So that I don't think I could have listened to. I needed to just sit down and mull with that for every once in a while. But there are other books that I can listen to. And the other strategy that I want to point out is quite a few educational books don't require you to read them cover to cover.
Correct, right.
A lot of them are strategies. So if you look at something like Casey Bell's Shake Up Learning, you can go to the chunk that's of interest to you, and you can find the little activity that's going to, work for your classroom or for whatever you need. So a lot of educational books, and I have a hard time, like I'm giving this advice and I don't follow it. I tend to read things cover to cover, but I don't know that a lot of educational books require that.
I think especially the strategy books, you're right. We don't need
So
and I find a lot of the books to be more accessible because it's got a teacher voice, which I'm familiar with and comfortable with, and you feel like you're having a conversation. So one of my go-tos is Donald Miller. She's got the Book Whisperer, which is about getting your kids to read, your students. And then she's got Reading in the Wild, and she's got a new one out called Game Changer.
Oh, cool.
about building, I believe it's about building classroom libraries. It's downstairs, but it doesn't read like a textbook.
Or a novel, or like even things like that. It's a different type of reading experience. Because as I look through even this, like she has different strategies, right? So student surveys. So everybody is a reader. As you go flip through this, you could jump if you're like, oh, I really want to use just read that one chapter.
Right.
Set that as a priority and then go back and dip your toes in. Right. I heard from a lot of teachers as I was asking this question, what are your favorite educational books? They would have some that they read like for fun and for sparks of inspiration. And my friend Nikki Vredenberg recommended The Art of Coaching. But she said kind of like my feeling about John Hattie's books, they are so great, but because they are a bit more dense and give you a lot more to really chew on, she said she really dips her toes in and will read a part and process it and then come back later. But not because the book is super hard, but because it gives you so much that you start pondering. And it's a different kind of pondering than, oh, I could use that app in my classroom.
Right. And I think as in-service teachers, we've got a huge advantage, right? Because we could read about this, do a little bit of pondering, apply it in our classrooms, see how it goes, and then come back and do some more reading and more pondering. Like we've got that kind of recursive cycle, which is nice.
You're right. We have a laboratory right in front of us where we can test some of these ideas and then go back to that source for a refresher. And it was fun getting ready for this chat because I went back to a whole bunch of books that I read, over a decade ago when I was working on my teaching certificate. And so I found, Learning is a Verb. And this was one I had not thought about even in several years. And I thought, I remember having an enjoyable experience interacting with that book. But it was, like you said, it was before I was a classroom teacher. So as I was even flipping through today, looking at my Post-it notes and looking at my underlines, I'm such a dork. But as I was flipping through and looking at my Post-it notes that I had on some pages, I was like, this is just so funny. It's like a microcosm of like me then, but some really solid things that I was like, you're right. Like one of my Post-it notes that I reread today was trust kids' instincts and follow where they go in their learning. And I was like, wow, from the mouths of me before I knew what I was talking about, like that is my teaching practices come full circle back to that of, yeah, let's follow kids. So I do think there's some power too in rereading books or just reskimming ideas.
Absolutely. And like, not that you were naive back then, but I think we all were naive, before we started, and we get bogged down with the, attendance and lunch report,
and forms and reports and conferences and email and
so it's good to be reminded of those moments, those little pearls of wisdom, and remind us why we're in this, because it's hard sometimes to do that. So I think that's what I look for in books. And being a professor now too, what inspires me? Like I'm looking for inspiration. I'm also looking for, sometimes when you have an idea, but you've never really like voiced it before, and then you go to a book and you're like, oh yes, that's it. So to find like that validation, to know that I'm not alone, either in some of the crazy ideas I have or in the questions or the concerns or the, my noticings. So for me, I think books can provide that for me in ways that other other forms of professional development maybe can't. I don't know.
I think that's really, I can't agree with you more. And I've had a series of situations. I was just talking to a teacher from Centerville this morning, not Centerville, but I was speaking to this lovely teacher this morning, and the whole time I kept going, I feel that way too. I feel that way too. And you're right. There is just this comfort in those observations being validated, those ideas being validated. And unfortunately, just the reality of life, right? It's not a bad thing. It's just the way things are. We may not, as educators, always get that validation from the people who work in our building. They might not think the way we do. We may not get all of that feedback. So it is important, rather than getting discouraged or burnt out. Sorry, it is important to find those outlets. And these few chats that we're doing about podcasts, about books, about social media, that's really what it's about. It's about finding your spark and keeping that energy level up as an educator. But I so love what you just said, Aimee, that it's really also about validating ourselves as educators. And that can happen via Twitter and online social media forums. It can happen with colleagues in your building. And you're right, it can happen with books. But I love getting to have these conversations because, like this morning talking to Yulia, it was just constantly me going, I feel that way too. And sometimes there's great comfort in knowing that other people also screw up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think I've never published a book, and I probably won't ever. So to have someone who has published a book and put it out there, like, I really messed this up. Like to watch kind of the great ones embrace those mistakes and walk us through that. I mean, we're human, and it's good to see that. And I don't know.
Yeah. And as teachers, I can only speak for myself. If I really struggled with the not being able to be perfect for my kids every single day. But back to what you were also saying of getting bogged down by all of the other things in teaching and maybe losing some of that spark, that's part of why I think this is so valuable. So whether you are taking like 10 minutes a day and reading a little bit, or if you're diving in, creating another great idea. I mean, this teacher I was speaking with this morning, again, their staff development, their meetings, they don't do meetings anymore where they just have lists of information and updates. Their staff meetings now are around a book study of some educational book study that the teachers read, and they jigsaw it. So they're not responsible for reading the entire book. So I really appreciated that there was this understanding that we may not all have time to read everything. So small groups are assigned a chapter or two. But instead of doing like a presentation on the chapter, the teachers who have read that chapter just bullet point the chapter of like, here are the key takeaways. And then they engage in a conversation. How do you see that in your classroom? How might this apply to our classroom, to our school? And so instead of their staff discussions being about, well, remember to do this, remember this is coming up, and this list of things that is important information, but maybe could be an email, their staff meetings are dynamic conversations about what's going on in their classrooms and what's going on with their kids. And I just went, what a much better use of your time. Right.
For everyone involved.
For everyone. And I've heard of people doing a similar thing. Certainly if your administration isn't doing that systematically, there's no reason why you can't do that as an educator. And if a book is too much, this was a nice suggestion too, like a before school reading club where every week if you have a group of 5 teachers, every week, one teacher is responsible for finding an article or a book chapter, not a whole book, but a book chapter, and getting copies, and say on Friday, making sure everyone has that copy. And then one morning the next week, they all meet to discuss that one article or chapter. And they just share their experience and talk about it. So it's building that connection with your peers and that support, but also continuing to get new ideas. But because they take turns of who is bringing the article, it really is about a lot of different educational topics. Have you done anything like that where you have a system of working with other people to explore educational books?
No, not to that extent, but I think that's a really great idea, because I think we get stuck in our pigeonhole or our little holes too. So it would be good to kind of be exposed to other things with that. And something else I was gonna say is, I don't think you have to read the book cover either to get value from it, because sometimes just knowing it's there on your shelf and there if you need it kind of as a reference, I think there's something to be said for that too.
That's a great point. And particularly if you're thinking, you know, like we had a couple recommendations when I asked teachers for books like this, like Google Apps for Littles. This is a great one. Find a couple strategies. I think one of the challenges sometimes with reading a book is you could read a book like this and go, I can't do all of this.
Yeah.
I can't do all of these things. And to what you said of us sometimes being hard on ourselves and feeling like, oh, well, now I just let a whole bunch of people down. So don't read this whole book cover to cover. This book wasn't designed to be read that way. This book was designed to be read, get one idea, and then try it.
Right.
Work on it in your classroom, and then put this book back on the shelf. And when you're ready for the next thing that you want to try, when you and your students, just as importantly, when your students have done that thing and mastered that thing and they're ready for the next challenge and you're ready, then go back to your bookshelf and grab the book and try that next thing.
Right.
So that's a great reminder.
Right.
I have this little resource sheet. The link for it is in the video description. So I just sent some emails to a whole bunch of teachers and administrators and just people that I know in the education space. If you have a book that you do not see on here and you think should be on here, please email it to me so that I can add it to this list. But I got a lot of great recommendations. And so I did want to start here at the top with this idea. There were a lot of people who shared books where they're basic. I loved this quote from Kelsey Johnson. She shared her top 4 books and she said, none of them have anything to do with education, and yet they have everything to do with education. So we talked a little bit about education books, but I think it's also important for teachers for us to expand that definition of education book and acknowledge that we can read some really fun, interesting books that will be fun for us to read that can also get us fired up and sparked as an educator.
Yes.
What have you read that fits into that broad general category, or what is on your mind about that?
So thinking about kind of maybe books that might be fun to read and outside of kind of what we think about maybe as professional development books, I think it serves us well as educators to read novels that feature students that might be different than us, or that might be experiencing some things that our students, a particular student might be. So like I think about the Joey Pigza series by Jack Gantos.
Okay.
If you haven't read it, Joey Pigza has ADHD. and it's a series. I want to say there's maybe 5 books, and a lot of people who read them are like, these are terribly written, but they're written from
His
the viewpoint of a
perspective.
kid who has ADHD. So I was a special ed teacher, and some days you would have those ADHD kids that you're like, why are you doing like, so to be able to read from Joey's perspective, I feel like I learned something about what it was like to be a child with dyslexia, even though it was a novel. And it helped me as a teacher and as a human, I would say.
What a great way to cultivate that empathy bone of,
Mm-hmm.
and we encourage our readers to do that when we're talking to students about what they're reading. That's a great idea. We were talking about this book a little bit. This is nonfiction because I believe it was written by a young man, an autistic boy from Japan, I think. Yes, The Reason I Jump. And I read that several years ago when it came out. It's very short. Each chapter is maybe a paragraph to 5 paragraphs long. So if you talk, I mean, I don't want to be too crude, but a lot of the chapters in this book, you could probably read if you took a slightly long bathroom break.
Right.
Yeah. And you could probably keep this book even in the bathroom and read a couple paragraphs, because whole chapters, yes, you can see whole chapters are a page long, a page and a half long.
Right.
And it's him detailing, one experience. But you're right. I bought that book immediately from my mom, who works with special needs students, and just said, you really need to read this, because it was very eye-opening. I thought I had a grasp. I thought that I was a pretty open teacher, and I thought I understood what I was working with when I was working with the students, autistic students who were in my English classes. And you're right, that gave me a much different perspective. There was a teacher, one of the recommendations, now that you say that as well, one of the recommendations from Lisa at the, she's over at the Missouri River Education Co-op, and I don't know what she taught, but she was a classroom teacher before she transitioned there. And she shared that Memoirs of a Boy Soldier was one that really, for similar reasons, but this was about resiliency in the face of trauma. And you're right, that's a really powerful, I need to add that recommendation of the dyslexia book series that you just mentioned.
Right,
I'm actually I'll add a whole extra little square on here that's about books written more from a different perspective.
Yep, I see Fish in a Tree there, which is a good, it's about a student with dyslexia, and I think she gets to like 5th grade. And, she's, a couple others I would recommend. This Is Not the Abby Show. It's by Debbie Reed Fisher. And Abby is, I believe she's leaving 7th grade. She's a rising 8th grader, I think. But she's twice exceptional, and that she's got ADHD, but she's also gifted in math and science. And she has a really bad experience with her English teacher, and ends up having to take summer school. But it kind of talks about, it shows the power of the influence of the teacher too. And
that's a great reminder for us as we're going through those things. I will create a new little square. So if you're watching this, on a recording, it's going to be there for you, but I will create a new square that is all about books from different student perspectives that can help us better understand some of our kids, because that is such a great tip, Aimee. Thanks for bringing that up. And I love those suggestions.
The other one that I've found a lot of success with my undergrads too, it's called Paper Things. It's by Jennifer Richard Jacobson. And the kiddo in there, her and her brother have become homeless, but not in the, like they're kind of couch surfing. But it really impacts her. She was a high achieving student and then she's not. And it takes a while for her teachers to notice. So it's a good reminder to kind of, for us to be like, maybe there's something else going on here, and looking into that.
I really like that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'm noticing, yes, we might not teach, like I'm a high school English teacher, so I might not necessarily pick up this book. And this wouldn't be a book that's in my sphere because it's probably not even in the high school library.
Right.
I would guess. I mean, it just, the cover makes it look like it's an upper elementary, targeted, and that could be way off. But that also means that probably I could read this book really quickly and get this. So just like how the reasons why I jump, that was a very fast read because I didn't have to spend a lot of time. I would imagine that some of these, if they're written for young adults, for us as teachers, they'll be pretty easy, smooth reads for us, but may really spark our thinking in a very different way.
And sometimes, like I saw on one of the Amazon pages, Miss Bixby's Last Day, sometimes I just need a good teacher book. Like I call them teacher books. Miss Bixby's Last Day. It's a novel, and it's not about the teacher necessarily, but it's about the impact she has had on 3 of her different students. And sometimes we just need that warm, fuzzy kind of reminder of that.
We do. And this is switching gears back a little bit. I read Richard Dufour's final book. He's one of the pioneers, leading trainers for the PLC model. And his last book before he died was In Praise of American Educators. And his main thesis was, we as educators hear all kinds of negative things all the time. That's what's in the media, like how bad our test scores are, how bad this is, how bad this is. And it's a well-worn book because it was traveling with me. But a lot of what he goes through is all of the gains that have been made, all of the improvements. He really takes time to highlight what has gone really well and the amazing things that teachers are doing. So great, have that nonfiction, have that fiction novel experience. But Richard Dufour is an educational researcher, and he breaks down a similar theme in this book that I found for very similar reasons, of just a nice pick-me-up, a reminder of like, things aren't going to hell in a handbasket completely. There are good things happening. There are a lot of great educators out there. And even books, I know that Ted Dintersmith's book, What Schools Could Be, is really aspirational, thinking about what schools could be. But as part of that aspiration, he also highlights stories of real educators who, at least in his perspective, are modeling how awesome schools could be and like these really cool things that schools could be. So yes, he is critical of some of the general institutional practices and how nothing has changed since the 1950s. But he also really takes time to highlight those sparks, those great educators who are making a difference. So you're right, we need that reminder, that pick-me-up.
Yeah. Sometimes I get nervous though when we look at those like high, I don't know, those like really highly praised teachers. What's the one where she wrote journals with her kids, and it's a book and then it was a movie?
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. With Hilary Swank. I can think of as Hilary Swank. I can't think of.
Exactly.
Her name is Erin, I think something. Wow, look at how intelligent we are. But I know what you're talking about. Or the one that, there's one with Hilary Swank, but there's also the one in LA
Right.
with,
There's Dangerous Minds, and there's oh shoot, it'll come to me as soon as we hang up. But and I'm sure this teacher is an amazing teacher, and she's a lovely person. But I think especially too, working with pre-service teachers, like, she ends up getting a divorce, and she ends up like she sacrifices basically her entire life to her teaching, which makes me sound like a terrible educator, but we can't do that either. And I think there's some danger in like putting that up as the pinnacle, like, this is what it takes to be a great teacher.
You're right, because it's setting up a false set of expectations. I feel that sometimes when I look at Pinterest, like, and I'm not on Pinterest, but when every once in a while, when you do, a Google image search, links to Pinterest come up as, as feeds for you. And anytime I have clicked on those, and I'm getting better at like reading and seeing it's Pinterest and just ignoring them, I could see why it would be very easy if some of those things that are held up as the ideal and the perfect, it can get even more depressing and frustrating, and we can be even more critical of ourselves, because how do you have a classroom that looks like that?
Right.
And if you're a young new teacher, you can't, like, part of what, like, I thought my classroom looked pretty cool, but part of that, it was a decade worth of just slowly accumulating a thing here that helps support my students and getting something donated here. But if I had gone out my first year of teaching and felt like I need to create and like decorate it, that's a lot of stress. So you're right. Some of those exemplars can, so we do have to fight against that of, yeah.
And it's a tricky thing, because we want to be great teachers. We want to have a big impact. And I'm absolutely 100% guilty of it too. Like, I go home feeling like, what more could I have done? Okay, I've taken an hour to watch This Is Us. I need to spend 4 more hours doing this. It's just, that's not healthy for us either.
Or I read Book Love, and I go to a training, because Penny Kittle is still in the classroom. She is still teaching away, and she has several different books, and she does a lot of public speaking. So I've attended a training of hers in person. And you're right, I've simultaneously felt really inspired and fired up, and kind of gone, I am not doing nearly enough. Like, look at what Penny Kittle is doing. And I have to remind myself that we're viewing the end product of Penny Kittle. Penny Kittle didn't, and I don't know this, I'm not her biographer, but I just knowing the process of teaching, that was not how she started teaching. She slowly, every single year, new techniques and things were developed. And by the time she perfected that over, I would guess, a decade of teaching, in order to get to the point where she has Book Love and where she is doing these trainings, she has had a decade of tweaking and perfecting that. So when when I'm sitting there as a young new teacher going, oh, I want to do that. I want to be Penny Kittle.
Right.
I also need to give myself a break of, you're not going to do that overnight.
No.
But I can take one strategy from Penny Kittle, and I can say, I am going to commit to implementing Book Love in my classroom, and we are going to read for fun for 45 minutes a week at the high school level. But I cannot take Penny Kittle and expect myself, because I have different kids, I have different expectations, I'm in a different school district, all of those factors. And I will evolve and bring in those ideas. So yeah, don't let the big what could be, stop
Right.
you from trying
Right.
something.
Yep. And there's a lot of rock stars out there, and we should celebrate them. And we can't all be rock star. I mean, we'll have our moments. We'll have our karaoke's, moments. But like, there has to be like, rock stars need audiences and fans and roadies, and so like it takes all of us. And
Yeah, and we're
that's
a rock star. Like, I like your suggestion of books that do celebrate the impact of teachers, because for a handful of kids, each of us is that rock star. And I was just talking to a teacher friend of mine about how I really struggled sometimes feeling guilty. This is not totally a book topic, but it's related, that I would feel guilty sometimes because I wasn't always the most patient. And there would be some times where I would feel like a kid would just constantly disappoint me, and I would start not being consistent as an educator. And I would really scold myself. And I was talking to her about it. And I said, I really feel guilty. I need to remind myself, I'm the adult. I know these kids are 17, 18 years old, but I'm the adult. They deserve the best me every single day. Like, I need to make that relationship. We were talking about relationships and building those connections, and I need to do that. And she looked at me and she said, there is no way you can do that for 125 kids.
No, every day. No.
Every single day. Exactly. She said, but I guarantee you, and it was so beautiful and so generous of her. She said, that's just unrealistic. She said, other teachers, that kid, you may not be the connection and that rock star teacher for every single kid. They're going to have other teachers and other adults. What we as educators do want to make sure that we're doing is that every kid has a rock star teacher, like has that rock star connection, but we need to let go of feeling like we need to be that rock star for every single kid. And like you said, every single day. We're going to hit it for different kids on different days as we differentiate, as we do different content, as we do different things. And I still think, I looked at her and I thanked her and I said, I still am going to hold on to it as a goal.
Yeah.
That I have a moment with every single student each semester. I think I was like, I still am going to hold on to that. And I don't know if I'll ever do it, but I'm going to hold on to that. But you're right. Like, we need to kind of connect. Yeah. Do you have another book? I mean, we're encroaching on an hour here. I've taken up quite a bit of your time. Do you have a book or two that you want to plug, that you feel like you want to make sure that we know how important that book was, or something that just really fired you up and refreshed you as a teacher?
Well, this one's going to sound out of the box. But I think we were talking too before we started recording about how sometimes it's good to get something out of the box because it just shifts our thinking a little bit. This is by Molly Bang. It's called Picture This, How Pictures Work. And she goes through, and I use this in my children's literature courses, but she goes through and breaks down how art works, like how illustrations work. And so I feel like, especially for elementary teachers, there's this pressure to kind of have to know everything about everything. And sometimes, I don't know, after having read this, my sister is an art historian. I will never be an art historian, but it helps me understand it more. So just, I think, expanding and putting myself in the position of a learner often, like this book does that for me, and I read it often. But I think remembering what it's like to learn something new and just kind of adding something different to your box. What else do I have? This one's called Spare Parts. This is based on a true story, but would fit with that kind of inspirational kind of idea. again, but kind of being reminded of what kids can accomplish and what we can accomplish. So it's about, so the subtitle is Four Undocumented Teenagers, One Ugly Robot, and the Battle for the American Dream. True story, happened in Phoenix, a Phoenix high school. These kids ended up wanting to enter like a aquatic robot competition.
Okay.
Their school had no swimming pool, so they couldn't test their robot beforehand. But the things that they accomplished, a couple more. This is actually a graphic novel version of William Ayer's book, but what it means to teach. So his original book was To Teach, The Journey of a Teacher. So this is a graphic novel version of that. But and then one last one. I wish my teacher knew. So they posed questions to kids. They gave them the sentence starter. I wish my teacher knew. Blank. And that's pretty surprising. And again, for teachers, it's good to be reminded of, that we're working with people, we're working with kids, no matter the grade level, So, like, here's one. I wish my teacher knew that my cousin needs to go to the hospital when she does not feel good, and I feel sad about her. So just being reminded of that,
Yeah. And you see those, I see those every once in a while posted on Twitter where people, take snapshots of they've asked their students that question. And there are some very powerful responses. So that's a nice, and that it's very different, but for some reason, when you were sharing that I was thinking about providing that space for students to express their worries and what's on their mind. And it reminded me of and I had not thought of this until right now, and it's a great education book. There's a collection of letters to Mr. Rogers, and it has the kid's letter and Mr. Rogers' response to the child. And I read it years ago, but for some reason, something about the way you were just describing that book reminded me of that, and the grace and the care and the empathy that Mr. Rogers shows answering these kids' questions. And some of them are pretty old, so some of the questions may feel a little dated, but they're the enduring challenges that kids face, and that, like, we as adults don't always see that pain. That's the pain or the worry or the confusion or the excitement. Like, right? I wish my teacher knew that I won the 4-H competition this summer.
Right.
Right? I wish my teacher knew that even though I might not be great at English, I have a prize. I raise prize winning heifers. Right? Like, I want my teacher to know that I'm good at something. And so not all of the I want my teachers to know or the Mr. Rogers letters need to be heavy or are heavy and negative. It is just that invitation.
And that's a good segue to that. Maybe it doesn't have to be books too. Like, that Mr. Rogers documentary came out in the fall. I went and I cried my eyes out, but just to be reminded of that too, and be inspired.
The power of a teacher, the power of a person to just connect with a kid and make a difference in their life. Yeah, I feel like there were a couple books that I was going to share, but they're on the list, and I'll maybe add a note or two, because I think that's the main takeaway, right? That ultimately, as we're talking about all of these books, the end goal is the same. The end goal is so that we can be energized as educators, right? Like, we want to stay fired up, or at least I do. You talked about, like, we want to be lifelong learners. We're modeling what being a good student is. We're continuing to learn, and we're continuing to be fired up. But in the end, all of that is because we care about kids.
Yes.
And we want to be creating the best possible learning environment. and we're going to fail. We're going to have misses. And that's why it's great to have that book that we can grab at the end of a frustrating day, that we can send a tweet out to our virtual professional learning network, that we can push play on a blog, like on a podcast, or click onto a blog and get that support so that we can Mr. Rogers it and rock star it, or whatever metaphor you want to use.
Yeah.
We can be there every day for kids, trying our best, knowing that we're going to continue to screw up.
Mm-hmm.
But when I talk to pre-service teachers, there's always that question at the start of the year, right? That you see, I have a student teacher. What is your advice for them?
Yeah.
And I used to think that I needed to tell them something profound. And now my go-to is that old quote: you on your worst day is better for those kids than any other option. So we need to let go. Like on our worst day as educators, we are still giving those kids so much that we don't give ourselves credit for. And yes, we want to keep striving, and we're going to keep trying, and we're going to grab the books and put on our headphones and listen to the books and listen to the podcasts, and we're going to have conversations like this. But ultimately, we are great because we're in there, we're fighting the fight, we're in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt would say. We're in the arena and we're getting dirty, and we're fighting for all of those kiddos.
Right. And be gentle with ourselves, like, too. And that's something I'm really working on right now too. Like, you know, I'm like, oh, it's been more than 24 hours and I didn't respond to that email, you know, like I just.
And did the world end, Aimee? Did the world actually stop turning? You're right, I don't know. I'm in a basement bunker concrete room that I literally think it could have been an old bomb shelter in the basement of this building in downtown Fargo.
Grand Forks is still out here. I can see it, but I don't know.
Oh, that's good. So see, email delay and the world is still going on. And I say that jokingly as someone who stresses out and makes myself feel so guilty over the exact same things. And so it's a classic case of I can say it to others, but I have a hard time. So I need that constant reminder. And these books can be that, and that can be that kind of that pick me up.
Inspiration and empathy, and, you know, just understanding, and, you know, I don't know. You can find everything in books, I think.
And you can escape to anywhere and get that inspiration. You're right. You can find anything in a book. So I hope that you have, those of you who are watching this, who are taking this web chat series for credit in North Dakota, I hope that's what you go out and do, that you find that book that can give you that spark of inspiration and that connection, that validation, that idea for how you're going to stay fired up to be that rock star for some kiddo. Thank you so much, Aimee. This was a much richer conversation than I anticipated it being. Like, this was really, like, I think we just solved the world's problems.
I think so. We didn't answer any emails, but we solved the problem.
We didn't answer any emails, and we did talk about books. That was our goal today. We did talk about books, but I just got so much more out of this conversation than I expected to walk away with some book recommendations, but I'm walking away with a whole lot more. So thank you for giving your time and giving. This was a great release and a great opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for, please do send your book recommendations, and we'll see you again next time.